other people will join us later, that's okay. If not, then it will be 3 of us. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our Hangout. And my plan for tonight is that, first of all, I will answer your questions, if you have any. And after that, I wanted to briefly talk about Major Project 2, because we already talked about multiples valuation. Unless you have questions, then we'll address these questions first in the first part of this Hangout. So Christina and Isis, do you have any questions? And again, you can type them or you can unmute yourself and ask them loud.
Not about the homework. I had questions about the project, Major Project 2.
Okay, you can ask questions about Major Project as well.
Okay. My first question, and I had asked you in the email about the revenues for the foster room. So basically, we will consider the revenues as 0, and like when we approving, when it's not approved.
Right. So your question, if I understand correctly, is about the second part.
Yeah.
When we have this bifurcation, because in the first part, there are we cannot really know what will happen, and therefore here we have to look at the expected value of revenue. While here now, because we have this 2 years delay with revenues, by the time we start actually the project, we will know whether we get FDA approval or not. And therefore we can make these projections separately. And you are correct that in this case, when we look at revenues, if approved by FDA, we don't really use expected value of revenue based on probability of approval anymore, because now in this fork, in the upper fork, it will be approved. So the only issue here with probability of success is that we still can get outdated. Right. The project can get outdated, so it's still not necessary that revenues will continue for all 8 years. But at least we know that in the very first year, 2022, we will have revenues. And then after that, if the project becomes obsolete, revenues will drop with some. And that's why we will need to multiply it by probability. And you are right that if we don't get an approval, then here revenues are basically 0, but it doesn't mean that our cash flows are 0. And the trick here is because of capital expenditures, that at least some of them needs to be done before the approval. So even if we don't get approved, we already made some investment, not all of it, but some of it. And therefore, we still can depreciate it, and we still can get tax benefit from the fact that depreciation is tax deductible, kind of to cover at least some of our losses.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And Julene, we are having questions and answers session first. So you're welcome to ask questions about homework or about Major Project 2. And Christina, you're welcome to type questions, or you're welcome to ask them by unmuting your microphone, whatever. So who would like to go next? No more questions? Okay, the question is about crystal ball. As usual, crystal ball is optional. You don't have to do it, but if you do it, and if you didn't download the trial version, maybe it's a good opportunity for you to try it, because for 2 weeks you can simply download it. Or if you resolve the issue with remote desktop, then you're welcome to try Crystal Ball. Again, it is not required. There is absolutely no penalty about not using it. But if you decide to use it, it will be very helpful and useful. And that's why I strongly encourage you to try it. And there is 5% credit for, well, if you do everything right, let me put it this way. With Crystal Ball, if you do everything right, then you get the full credit for using it. That will be in addition to your overall score. And if you do something right, and so it's working but not completely, you might get some partial credit. Again, it's the total will be 5% of your project score. Other questions? The question is how to download Crystal Ball. You go to Oracle website, and on Oracle website, there should be, well, first of all, you have to have a desktop. Unfortunately, Windows. Unfortunately, it doesn't work if you have Apple computer. But if you have PC with Windows, then probably it will be faster for me just to go to Oracle Crystal Ball. And okay. And here is the Crystal Ball downloads. And here, I guess you have to accept the license first, and then you download Crystal Ball from here. And it will give you, before you buy it, it will give you 2 weeks trial license. Okay, if that tells me that the link does not work for the class, that's very strange because I copied the link from class announcement to the email. And since you managed to join us here, it should be the same link. So let me very, very quickly check what's going on with the classroom. Any other questions? Meanwhile, again, right now we have the Q&A part when you can ask questions about homework, or you can ask questions about a project. And after that, I was thinking about talking about project, but some topics were already covered.
With the operational cash flow, is we calculating that the same way as we calculated in major project 1?
Automation, yes. Automation okay. Cash flow, pretty much until you go to scenario analysis, everything is very, very similar to what you already studied, what was already covered. The only issue here, please pay attention. Here you have, I think it's for the first time, we have the salvage value in this project. It means that after the end of the project, the remaining equipment will be sold. And the good news is that at the time when it will be sold, its book value will be equal to 0. And therefore, since it will sell it at 25% of original cost, it means that from the tax point perspective, that will be very, very easy to calculate what the value will be. But again, don't forget to take into account the fact that the project will be sold at the residual value. Now the link works for me, so everything is fine. It's probably something wrong with the browser. Okay, any other questions? I know some people wanted to talk about homework that was already done, the terminal value homework, but I'm planning to post solution tonight. And so people who wanted to resubmit, they have until tonight to resubmit it. That's why I really didn't want to go over solution, because once I go over solution, they won't be able to resubmit. It was pretty straightforward. And again, if you, after I post solutions tonight, if you still have questions, then we can discuss it later, if you don't mind, because I would rather wait to let people who wanted to resubmit homework to do it. And reminder to everybody, nobody so far used this free pass. You have a right to resubmit one homework. And for terminal value, because it's a theoretical exercise, it's not the real life company, there is a solution that I will post. For previous homework, there was no one solution. You were working with your own companies, and therefore I couldn't post the solution. And for the next homework, the multiple evaluation homework, again, there will be no solution posted, but the same rule applies. Once I grade your homework, you will have 96 hours to resubmit your corrected homework, and there will be no penalty for that. Are there any questions? If there are no questions, I wanted to briefly talk about a couple of things about major project, and then we can finish. It will be a very quickly hangout today then. So my first point I wanted to emphasize, because some people already were asking these questions, is that in scenario analysis here, you're asked to calculate expected net present value for automation project. And in this case, the probabilities of each scenarios are given in the project description. So if you go to the project description, you see that here we have probability that the base case has probability of 40%, then with probability 30%, there will be a decrease from plastic sales, and the probability of that is 30%. Even more decrease, the probability of that event is 20%, and decrease pretty much by half. The probability of that happening is only 10%. What you're expected to do is to calculate NPV for each of these scenarios. Very, very similar how we were doing scenarios, NPVs in project one. And once you have these separate NPVs, you can calculate the expected net present value by using the expected value formula. You multiply probability of event by the net present value of this event. And you add these together, and that will give you the expected net present value. For break-even, you have a choice. You don't really have to find what is the break-even that will give this expected NPV equal to 0. No, you can just look at one scenario. What is the sale at which the NPV will be equal to 0? So that's easier than finding the sale such that if it starts decreasing with these probabilities, then expected NPV will be 0. That's also possible to do, and you're welcome to do it. You'll get full credit if you do it right in both cases, as long as you do it right. I see that there are a couple questions. Oh, that's again about homework. If we resubmit homework and receive a lower grade the second time, do we keep the higher grade? It never happened before, because usually when people resubmit, they correct their earlier mistakes. But since it's a free pass, let me commit to not decreasing your grade. So no, you will not. Yes, I mean, I apologize. Yes, you will keep the higher grade. Your grade will not suffer. Okay. Any other questions?
So for the break even by product, I had for mine, I had used the 80,000, well, the 80 million or 80,000. Is that okay? Because I didn't even, I took it of MPV.
But no, because the break even is the value of sales. So instead of 80,000, there will be a different sales volume that will give you 0 net present value. If you're using 80,000, then there will be no break even. And this break even value, it will be pretty much throughout all the years. There is no growth, nothing. So what you'll have to do, again, to use GoalSeek, for example, you have to connect these sales. Not type 80,000, but connect them. And everywhere you need to have formulas. So now if I want to use GoalSeek, I would say, of course, here there should be other formulas. And that would mean that if I start from annual by product sales through formulas, I eventually will have to arrive to NPV. And then I would say, I want this NPV to be equal to 0 by changing this by product sale. The by product sale, actually you could even do it manually. You'd say, okay, what if it is 70? Then everything here should automatically change to 70. Your earnings will change based on new values, because everything needs to be connected through formulas. And eventually, your net present value will change. And now,
yeah, that's the one I use. And I did the what if, and I did the 80, the C9. Well, I did the
yes,
C29
yeah, that's correct.
to 0.
Yeah. No.
Okay.
Yeah, I misunderstood.
I thought that you were saying we had to use the scenario one.
No. You use what you did is correct. I thought that you kept 80 as the break even, because 80 is not a break even. Sorry, I misunderstood you.
And I actually got an answer this time compared to major project 1.
Okay, very good. That's good. I look forward to looking at it.
Okay.
Let us move on here. That's a little bit more complicated. Let us start from the first case. And the first case is when you don't really know. So here we have a new drug, and this new drug takes time to develop. And you have to make investment now. So pretty much what happens, you already know what you will be doing. So you already can start building equipment, and you can start building equipment next year, because now you still have to do some R&D. And then next year you'll start building equipment, and if you build this equipment, you will be able to sell 2 years from now in 2020. The problem is that you will not know whether you'll get an FDA approval or not. So you have kind of blindly to build this plant, or create equipment, and then suddenly FDA might not approve you. So you have to take the fact that you might not get approved into account. And how you get this into account, you take this into account with probability. So probability of approval here is only 10%. So probability of success is 10%. If you are approved, then your revenue is 10 billion. If you are not approved, then your revenue is 0. That would mean that when you are calculating expected revenues, as you should do, your expected revenues should be probability of approval times revenue if you're approved, plus probability that you will not get approved times revenue if you are not get approved, 0. Then next year, what will happen is that you will potentially can increase your sales by 50%. But again, here everything hinges on the fact that you get approved. So again, you are using the probability, and now there is another probability that makes things more complicated, and there is a probability, only 5%, but still probability that your project becomes obsolete, that a rival comes in and your patent protection doesn't really work. So now, in order to get revenues here in 2021, not only you have to get approved, but also you have to continue successfully next year. And from probability theory, we know that if events are independent of each other, then it will be just probability of one event times probability of another event. Then next year, I guess you got the idea. To get here, we need to be approved. We don't have to get obsolete previous year, and we don't have to get obsolete next year. So again, it's these three probabilities multiplied. And if everything is good, now we grew by another 50%. And then we grew by another 50%. And I think after that, the growth will stop. So in the fourth year of sales, that's the last time. So first year of sales grew by 50%. Second year of sales, then we grew by another 50%, then by another, and here that's when sales become stable. Starting from the fourth year, everything is stable, but still it might, in terms of expected value, our expected revenues will be getting down, down, and down a little bit, because every time we have to take into account this probability of getting obsolete. So that's one complication. Don't forget that our costs are related to revenues. So for example, I don't want to give you the exact numbers, but hypothetically, the probability of getting to 2022 will be the product of these three numbers, while probability of getting to 2023 will be these four numbers. So you see probability gets down, down, and down. The easy way to calculate, and if you look at Excel formulas, you would realize that you can just take the number that you already have in the previous year and then multiply it by probability this year. And if there is a growth, then you multiply it 1 plus the growth. So I take this probability, multiply it by 1 plus growth, whatever the growth is, 50%, then multiplied it by probability of getting obsolete that year. And this way, because the previous year already took into account all earlier probabilities, formula-wise, it will be much easier. And that's what I recommend you to do. So you start from the first year, whatever the first year sales are, multiplied by this probability. Next year, you take the previous year, then multiply it by growth, and multiplied it by probability of getting absolute. And then you continue year after year after year. And that's what will happen. Now with costs, our costs are percentage of revenues, right? Because these are our direct costs, cost of goods sold. They are 15% cost of goods sold ratio. They are 15% of, are they? Let's check. Okay. Cost of goods sold are estimated to be 15% of revenues. But our fixed costs, SG&A expenses, are $2 billion a year if the drug is produced and zero otherwise. So that would mean that for SG&A, we have to apply the same concept, which is 2 billion times probability of success. It doesn't depend on revenues here, because here we are dealing only with expected values, but it is the same approach. Once we calculated our costs, depreciation, remember we had to take CapEx before we know whether it will be approved or not. Because of that, our depreciation is unconditional. We just have to depreciate our investment of $2 billion over 10 years in this case. Okay? We just depreciating it over 10 years. Then we calculate our earnings before interest and taxes. We calculate taxes, we get our net income. Notice that in 2019, there is nothing actually going on except for CapEx. But in 2018, there is some R&D going on, and R&D is part of the income statement. That's part of the cost. So it will have the tax effect. And so we'll have some losses here. Then we have our operating cash flow. In 2019, we also have investment. And then we have our free cash flow. And then you have to calculate net present value. And you have internal rate of return. The question is, do we have to type 2 in B3, or do we have to put 2 billion? I recommend writing somewhere that all numbers are in billions. That will save you some space. And because everything is relative, as long as you are consistent, for example, 600 million will be 0.6, I would just put everything in billions here.
So we can basically shrink all the numbers down, because I have the same issue with this week's homework. Some of my numbers are in thousands and some of them are millions.
Oh, so okay. So that's a slightly different story. So in this homework, you can do everything in millions. That's fine. You just make sure that the numbers that are in thousands, you'll properly convert them into millions. So in your homework, that would mean that, let's say you have, usually what happens that your market cap will be the price and times the number of shares, right? So if your shares are in millions and if your debt, just for example, is in thousands, and if it was given, I don't want to type it here. So imagine you looked and it was given, it said 100,000, right? And given as 23 million shares. And price was, let's say, $20. Then you need to decide in which units you are doing it. And of course, to save some space, probably here in millions will be easier. So that would mean that here you'll have to type 23, and you'll have to type in millions. And debt will be also in millions. Notice, despite the fact that it was given in thousands, it is, and because it is in millions, instead of 100, I have to put 0.1 here. This is in millions, and my market cap is in millions as well. So, well, usually probably it's much higher debt than that. Maybe it's even debt will be given in millions and shares will be given in thousands. I'm not sure, but you get the idea, right? Everything needs to be in the same units, because otherwise you will, once you trying to find enterprise value here, that's where the problem can arise. If some numbers are in millions and some numbers are in thousands. Notice here, my shares market capitalization is in millions and my debt is also in millions. Actually, it's very, very good idea. I should have probably put it somewhere here that I would write that all the numbers are in millions. And then you would know that all these numbers are in millions. So here is your debt, and this debt is in millions, and your market cap is in millions as well. In this case, you can just add them together without any problems. But imagine that you looked and the shares were given in billions, not in millions, and market cap was in billions. Then if you did not convert, you would make a mistake, because it would be market cap 6.87, while in reality it is 6,870 million. And in this case, notice my enterprise value is pretty much my debt, because I used wrong units for market cap. So be very, very careful here how you are reporting the numbers. That's a very good point, because it's a very common mistake in this homework when different units are used. Be consistent, use the same units. And if you get some strange results for enterprise value, check that you are consistent. So, very good point. Let us move to this project. Yeah, so here everything you can report in billions, because everything is given. You don't really have to do any market search. So everything is given in billions. That's perfectly okay. Now, the second part we already discussed earlier. Those of you who joined later, for the second part, now you break your capital expenditures into two. The advantage is that you know what the FDA decision will be before making the second investment. The disadvantage is that you have shorter period to enjoy these protected sales, and also you lose 2 years of sales. And of course, the question is whether it's worth it. To find out, you have to find the expected value. And how to find expected value? Now you treat these two scenarios separately. In the first scenario, you know that you will be successful. But after that, there is still a risk of getting obsolete starting from 2023. And in your second scenario, you know that you will fail. So revenues are 0. And because you know that you will fail, it will probably affect your capex, and it will probably affect overall depreciation, because you will have to invest only the part that will be before the FDA approval. If there is no FDA approval, you'll just say, okay, stop. We are not making second investment. And that would mean you don't really have to depreciate it anymore. Okay. Now, if you use crystal ball, that will be a little bit different, because now your revenues need to be linked to each other when you treat the cases, the probabilities of success. There is a screencast how to use binary probability, because here it's either success or failure. I recommend you to watch that screencast. Some people were complaining that I spent too much time in these Hangouts on crystal ball, as if it is something that is major part of this course. It is not a just new type of software, and I liked it a lot, I have to admit. But again, if you want to, we can talk about it next time, or you can watch the screencast that already shows you how to treat this binary distribution. Question, is the OCF calculated the same as in major project 1? I don't quite understand the question. Operating cash flow is EBIT 1 minus the tax rate plus depreciation, and minus any changes in net working capital. But in this case, there are no changes in net working capitals. So yeah, operating cash flow is the same formula. Right. Then the next phase of this, so sorry, I forgot to mention that. Once you calculated NPV of each outcome, in case of approval and in case of rejection, then you have to find the expected net present value. And again, the formula is the same. You take NPV in each outcome, this one and this one, and then multiply it by the probability of the outcome, whether probability, which is the probability of approval. And that will give you the NPV, the expected NPV. And then you compare it with one stage option, and when you will be writing a report later, you will decide which option is better. And if you decide to do crystal ball, by the way, here your expected NPV, if you model everything correctly, should be very, very close, almost identical to expected NPV that you were calculating here. The next option that the company has is to buy another company. And this company is farther ahead with developing this drug. And because it's farther ahead, it already has probability of approval that is higher, 0.4. And also, it will start its sales in 2019, so 1 year earlier. But because it will get approval earlier, that would mean that sales will end up earlier as well. So sales will end at 2028. Now, here, this company has higher costs, operating costs, but you think that if you acquire this company, you will manage to do cost reduction and you will manage to reduce these costs. So the question is, what is the value of this company to you? And don't forget that you have to take into account that you have to pay to buy this company. So the question is, what is the price that you should be ready to pay for it, so that it still will be attractive than developing this in-house? So again, we are playing with NPVs. Which NPV will be higher? And the last part is not without saying that buying Pharmaset is better. I'm not saying that, but just assuming that the company decides to go with acquisition, they can partially finance this acquisition, not completely, but partially. They can finance this acquisition by getting money from Menlo Venture. Well, for me, it's a local kind of Menlo Park. That's why I called it Menlo Venture, Silicon Valley venture capital firm. And they're ready to provide $5 billion investment. And the question is, should you take this investment? And if you take it, then in what form? All equity case, convertible debt, or redeemable preferred? In our example, that is a little bit too early to discuss right now, because these forms of financing are topic of Module 5. So let us wait until we start Module 5, and then we'll go more into detail. And you're welcome, of course, to look at materials that are already posted in Module 5 and try to work this out. But for now, we will just say that everything here needs to be looked at from the company's perspective, not from the investor's perspective, but from the company's perspective. And in this case, everything needs to be kind of inverse. Negative, and the cash flow, what we pay to investors should be negative. The money that we receive from investors is positive. So we get $5 million, we have to give them something in return. And what is our net present value? And what we give in return is described in the case. And again, once we start Module 5, we'll cover that in more detail. And I think that's pretty much it I wanted to talk about today. So let us have another round of questions if you have any. And if not, then we'll stop here. Questions, please. Well, okay, in this case, thank you very much for coming. I appreciate your attendance, and good luck with your homework. And again, always feel free to ask questions via email or post it in conference forum. And I encourage you to actually post it in conference so other people will see questions and answers. And if you don't want to put your name, you can always ask questions anonymously. Okay. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.